10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 409. Hey, everybody, welcome into episode 409 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. So, we're wrapping up the month of May by taking a look at one more piece of little vocabulary over Donna Lee. And in this episode, it's actually really exciting. We're going to talk about how we can still use the melody as a model for this short vocabulary that we want to come up with, but we could take a little bit of artistic license in terms of how we're actually going to grab a piece of vocabulary that doesn't fit perfectly, but by making some tiny, tiny changes, we can make it into basically the perfect piece of little vocabulary. So, this is sort of like the next step to what we've been doing all month. And again, it's just kind of showing you like you don't need to be super dogmatic about it. The melody is simply a starting point, and then you can basically do whatever you want. Okay, so let's look at the measure that we are going to be investigating here and turning into our own thing. Okay, we're going to go deep into the tune for this piece of vocabulary. We're going to measure 25 to find this piece of vocabulary that we're going to use. All right, so when we get to bar 25, we have modulated from the key of A flat major into the key of the relative minor, which is F minor. And what we see is we see this really cool phrase. It's a really nice little chromatic based piece of vocabulary. We're just going to grab a little tiny piece of it. We're going to grab this. And if you look at what that is actually in terms of over an F minor chord, it's 5. And then we go a half step below the 5, back to 5. And then we go chromatically up to 6. That's what we're going to use as our model here. Okay. But we're going to talk about a lot of really cool stuff that's happening here. So, let's take this to the first chord of Donna Lee, which is A flat major 7. And let's go to 5, go a half step below, back to 5, chromatically up to 6. Sounds pretty good, but here's where I want to start to make some modifications to this. And they're very minor modifications. So, what I realize is that I can do 5, go a half step below, back to 5. But instead of using a half step there, if I go diatonically up 2 notes, I end up on the next chord tone. So I'll end up on 7. And I actually really like that, both because I'm going from chord tone to chord tone, in this case, 5 to 7. And I think it just sounds great. So I'm going to modify it a little bit. I'm going to give myself that artistic license to modify this. It's not exactly what it was in the melody, but I actually really like it. I think it's a great sounding piece of vocabulary. So what if I took that across the first couple of chords? Sounds pretty nice, doesn't it? Oh, and then we should do the next chord because this one's really cool how it points out the difference in the seventh of what's happening with the chord. So that's great. Now I have my first piece of little vocabulary. I made one tiny little tweak to it, and I love it. I think it's a great, useful piece of vocabulary that I could use that would really benefit me. But now I start to think to myself, well, actually, I could use this little piece of vocabulary starting on any chord tone, and it would actually work pretty well. So, what if I jump down to the root of A flat major 7 and I start on the root, go down a half step, go back to the root, and then I go diatonically up and it connects me to the next chord tone? Ooh, that's really nice too. So I've taken this little piece of vocabulary that did start on the 5, and I noticed something about it. Oh, this would actually work really, really well if I started on the root. Well, let's test our hypothesis on the third. What if I started all of them on the third and did the exact same shape? Well, that works really beautifully as well. So, do you see how this one little tiny idea, now that I'm comfortable with this idea of little vocabulary, now it's starting to pay off in like a major way where now I'm comfortable enough with the idea that I can start to flip some things and I could start to use my own sensibilities, my own sense of musicality, and now one of these little tiny pieces of vocabulary turns into basically an endless stream of ideas that I can use to get more familiar with this tune, to build my reserve of things that I can play that are muscle memory, to increase my vocabulary to whatever point I want to. Can we try one more thing? Let's see if it actually works if we start on the seventh. So, what would happen if we started on the seventh and we did the same pattern? Huh. Well, maybe that doesn't work so well because I'm getting that sound of A flat major 7. I'm getting the sound of the flat 7. I actually don't like that too much. So, what if instead of, if I started on the seventh, instead of going down a half step, I went down diatonically? Hmm. I still don't know if I like it. What about the second chord? Hmm. So I'm not sure if I like that, but you see, I didn't hesitate to try it. And I think that's really, really important for everybody is like if you have an idea, sit down, try it, see how it sounds. And to me, what we already did, we figured out we could use this piece of vocabulary on the fifth, the root, and the third. So my mind naturally goes, well, can we use it starting on the seventh? That is a chord tone after all. I try it, and then I realize, you know what? I don't really like it, and even if I make a modification to it, I don't really like it even if I do that. So that's cool. Now I know I shouldn't do it because I tried it and I didn't like the sound of it. Okay. So you see how this not only is teaching us hard skills, this little vocabulary, like being able to take a whole bunch of things and put it over every single chord in a tune, but it's also opening our mind and teaching us how to think if we take this next step in the journey, which is to start figuring out where we can take a piece of vocabulary and putting it, right? How can we flip it into something else? And if there's anything that you want to do as a jazz musician, it's learning how to think, right? Because the activities are endless. At the end of the day, you just want to be a little more self-sufficient in how you come up with them. I think that that's insanely important. Okay, so the Patreon members are going to get a little demonstration track of the piece of vocabulary, the modified piece of vocabulary in all three positions. So starting on the root, starting on the third, starting on the fifth. You're going to get demonstration tracks for that so that you can test yourself after you've worked on this stuff. And I think that's going to be really important. Now, the difference between the people that are going to get something out of this and the people that aren't. The people that aren't going to get anything out of this is they're going to turn off this podcast and they're going to go, wow, those are some really cool ideas. Now I know that I can, take a little piece of vocabulary and move it all over the place, and that'll give me a bunch of benefits. Cool. I'm a lot better now. Well, those people aren't going to get anything out of this. The people that are going to get the benefit are going to be the ones that actually sit down with their instrument and get into the trenches of doing this over every chord. Those are going to be the people that win. So, are you one of those people? Do you want to get better? Then you actually have to do this. Okay. So for the Patreon people, you're gonna have that test at the end of the day where if you can do it with me, you won. Basically, that's it. You can do it, and then you can take this thing and do whatever you want with it. Okay. So remember that it's the action takers that will always win when it comes to the people that are going to sound the best and the people that are going to actually see this improvement in their playing. And don't forget about that. Write that down, put it on your wall. It's the action takers that win. Okay. So I mentioned Patreon and what the Patreon members will get. We're a listener supported podcast. So if you like the show and you like what we're doing here, consider supporting us with a small monthly donation. You do get all these materials in return for that donation, an endless well of things to practice. We have materials from all of our past episodes over there. So you can find that by going to 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, or going to patreon.com and just searching for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Quick shout out to some new patrons this week. Thank you to Ali, JP, and Lucas. Thank you so much for joining up, becoming a part of the family. I hope you're enjoying all those materials over there. And to all the people that have been supporting us for any amount of time, thank you. Really appreciate it. You're the reason why this show keeps coming out. So again, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners or patreon.com and search for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. We're going to take next week's off. It's the 5th Friday of the month. So we'll see you 2 weeks from today. Hope you have a great weekend and a great week ahead. And we'll talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.